Hi, I'm Patrick Baboumian, and I think I'm mostly known for being a vegan athlete. I was basically one of the first strength athletes to actually go vegan, and that's mainly what I got known for. And then I was part of the Game Changers documentary by James Cameron, and I think that opened me up to a little bit of a bigger audience. So that's mainly what I'm known for. Otherwise, I'm a psychologist, and for the last 3 years, I've been working on a video game. Yeah, so before I went vegan, I was vegetarian for a while. And my reasons were mainly ethical ones. So and ethical sounds so abstract and kind of philosophical, but it was really practically that we used to live near a forest, and we had a lot of wildlife rescues, and we were always like taking care of some animals. And at the time where I made the decision, we had just had for several months a crow baby that we kind of got back on its feet. We found it in a pretty bad state and tried to get it, nourish it to a point where we could release it to the wild again. And so at that point, my thinking process was that right at that moment, I had put so much time into trying to help this one bird, a lot of time and energy. And so I thought, well, at the same time that you put all that attention for this one bird, you probably eaten like 20 chickens or so. So I started to think that didn't make any logical sense, and that was basically the initial seed that brought me to make the decision to not eat meat anymore. And it really came down to the question if I would kill all the chickens that I eat. And I'm talking about chickens because I make the connection to the crow, but of course I was eating other forms of meat too. So the question was, would I kill those animals myself if I would have to? And I knew I wouldn't. So I thought it's kind of dishonest to just buy a product where you kind of are in a situation where you can ignore all the bad stuff that happens with it. And so I went vegetarian, and I was vegetarian for about 6 years. And during those 6 years, I learned more and more about how vegetarianism is not really a really good solution if you want to reduce animal suffering. So at one point, I understood that I wasn't really doing a good job trying to reduce animal suffering as a vegetarian, because you're still consuming animal products. So as long as you're still consuming dairy and you're consuming eggs, there's a lot of animal exploitation and a lot of suffering actually happening so that you can get those products. So I stopped. I wouldn't say consuming. I stopped buying eggs, I think 2 years before I even went vegan, because of that, and because I learned that there was a case of bird flu in Germany, and at that time you weren't allowed to have any birds outside, so they had to be indoors. Which is obviously on the packaging, and so that people can feel better about themselves because they're buying the eggs from birds who have the chance to go outside and are not forced to be indoors. And you weren't allowed to have that, but you could still buy eggs that had the label of free range chickens, which wasn't even allowed at that point. So that's when I thought that this whole labeling business is probably bullshit. So that's when I stopped buying eggs. I still ate them because, first of all, I wasn't vegan, so I was still consuming like products that have eggs in them. So I wasn't really doing a great job there either. But it was like step by step getting to the point where I was finally ready to make this decision, and then the real kind of pivotal moment that got me to actually go vegan was when I won the title of Germany's Strongest Man as a vegetarian. And what that did is I realized that, because at that time it was kind of unheard of that the guy who doesn't eat any meat is supposed to not be the strongest guy in the country. But now all of a sudden I was able to call myself the strongest guy in the country because I was the heavyweight champion in a sport called strongman. So what that did is I realized that through all the media attention that I was getting at that time, that I was actually able to inspire other people, especially young guys. I was getting a lot of feedback from younger dudes who were basically telling me that, and it wasn't just about inspiring them, to give up meat or anything, but I realized it was a cultural thing, because a lot of them were actually telling me that having me as the strongest guy in the country speak about being compassionate with animals gave them permission to kind of show that, because they were saying, like, I have the same thoughts, but I'm afraid to express them, but because I don't want to come across as soft and kind of be laughed at by my peers. But now that you speak about this in TV, I feel like that gives me permission to speak about those feelings, because if the strongest guy in the country can have a soft side, then it kind of opens up a way for me to do the same thing. So I felt like that was a really powerful position that I was in, and it kind of happened just like by accident. So I wasn't, none of that was planned. And up to that point, I wasn't seeing myself as an activist or anything. I was a vegetarian because I had these, thoughts, and it was just a private thing. But when I realized that I was in a position to, inspire a lot of people and kind of maybe be useful in a way to inspire some really positive change, basically on a cultural and societal level, that really put the pressure on me, because I felt like if you are kind of a role model to a lot of people, you have to do a better job. Just being vegetarian and, like eating less eggs and so on, that doesn't really cut it. Because I knew that it wasn't enough. But the problem was, what was really holding me back was that at that point I basically had a professional career in strongman. So although I was still studying psychology, so that wasn't my main job, so to say, but the sports was quite a important part of my life, basically. So I just didn't know if it would work. Like, what was really holding me back was, I thought it would be great if I could be a vegan role model and not a vegetarian role model. But I had no idea if it works, because there was literally no other strongman out there who was vegan and who was even near to the level that I was at. Like, there were a few I knew, powerlifters and strongmen, but none of them, they were like what I would consider hobbyists, basically. So like, this is no disrespect at all. It's all good, but they were not internationally competing athletes. So I was really not sure if it would even work. And what I really didn't want was, I thought, now that I have all this attention, if I try it and I fail, I'm going to basically prove the opposite of what I want to prove, namely that it's possible to be vegan and to be on the highest level in strength sports. So that was quite a struggle. Took me a few weeks to make up my mind and kind of get to the point to actually make the decision. Then I told my wife, and she literally said, because it seemed so, she was a meat eater back then, so me being vegetarian was already strange for her. But when I told her that, she was like, okay, what's the next step then? Are you going to get kind of like a balaclava and go and blow up butcher shops, or what's the next point in your downright spiral to extremism? And I was like, no, just let me do this. I tried to explain to her what my thoughts were, but she wasn't really down with it. And that's important, because she basically went vegan 6 months after I went vegan. She went vegetarian 6 weeks after that, and then 6 months later she went vegan. And I think it was important that I didn't try to convince her at all. That was my first lesson as an activist, was that if you have grown-ups in front of you, it really doesn't work if you try to put too much force into trying to convince them. So my whole motto as an activist basically became just talking about my own experiences, and then letting people basically make of that what they want, because I felt like that was something that was quite, at least in the beginning, quite effective in my own family. Because my wife was one case, the other case was my mom. So my mom basically had the same reaction. She was really worried. And I didn't try to convince her as well. But then when I went vegan in the end, that was a really long answer. But the short one is, I did it because I was in a position to influence other people, and I really wanted to be a good role model. That's the short answer, right? So when I then went vegan, I realized that it really, really accelerated my recovery. My joint pain was way less. So what I really discovered is that it was really helping me as an athlete to control inflammation in my body. Because as an athlete, when you train, what you're really doing is you're putting your body under stress. And that's what causes your body to grow, basically. That stress causes adaptation, and so your body adapts to being exposed to stress over and over again. But what comes with the stress is a lot of inflammation in your body. So especially as a strength athlete, as a strongman who flips cars and pulls trucks and does stupid stuff like that, that causes a lot of micro trauma in your body and a lot of inflammation. So you feel that. You have joint pain all the time, basically. And I realized that going vegan really, really helped with that. Like my inflammation levels went way down, joint pain was completely gone. And my mom, she suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, which is really like connected to having a lot of autoimmune processes that just cause inflammation and joint pain and pain in general in your muscles and soft tissue. So I just told her that. I just told her that I would really be happy if she just tried it out to see if it helps her with her condition. So she did it then a year after I went vegan, and then stayed vegan basically the rest of her life. She died a few years ago of lung cancer, but she was vegan for the rest of her life, basically. And that really taught me that I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is just to share knowledge and your experience with people, and then give them a chance to, get to the point to make the decisions for themselves. So that's why I basically became kind of like, my motto as an activist basically became to just do that. Just share with people the positive experiences that I have with veganism, and kind of, hope that inspires them to do incremental or big changes in their own lives. Yeah, the protein thing is kind of complicated, and I have to also say honestly that I have a very complicated kind of story with protein myself, because what you have to realize that is so we're at the point where the fitness movement has become quite mainstream. And the fitness movement, like the protein idea, is a core part of the fitness movement. So what we see in the general public, basically, having a lot of people worry about getting enough protein, that is something I think that's an influence that comes absolutely from the fitness movement, and especially within the fitness movement, strength athletes are basically like a subpopulation. And we're even worse when it comes to that. So we're really, really kind of obsessed with, making sure that we get enough protein. And I have been like that basically throughout my whole career. Like even after going vegan, protein has always been something that I have put a lot of attention to. And with my knowledge today, I would say probably put too much attention to for the longest part. It's tricky though, because the problem is that when you're a professional athlete, you try to optimize everything. You try to optimize your nutrition, your recovery, basically everything that you can optimize, because that's gonna lead to to get you in a position where where you can make sure that you get as much performance out of your body as you can. And obviously you want to win competitions against other athletes. So you become obsessed with little details, basically. It's not a healthy mindset. And obviously, as a professional athlete, you do a lot of stuff that is really not optimal for, for long-term health, but just focused on getting as much, optimization and as much performance out of your body as you can. And the obsession with protein is just one part of it. So I would say to anyone who is not a professional athlete, just don't worry. Because if you eat a balanced and a generally a healthy diet, and you eat a lot of different stuff, protein is never going to be a problem. Usually, the standard Western diet gives you an overabundance of protein, which is a problem because I think a huge part what people don't understand is that protein doesn't just do great stuff in the body. So it is great to help you, for instance, when you're on a weight loss diet and you're trying to lose weight, to make sure that you don't lose a lot of muscle. Like, for instance, a bodybuilder who is trying to prepare for a competition goes on a very extreme diet. If you're on an extreme diet, you want to make sure to get enough protein because otherwise your body is going to burn muscle instead of burning fat. You want to burn your fat and keep as much muscle as possible. So for those guys, it makes kind of sense to be a little bit more obsessed. But if you are just a normal, like a hobby, fitness guy, you go to the gym 3 times a week and you just try to stay healthy, don't worry too much about protein. If you're trying out a vegan diet, make sure you eat a lot of legumes. And when I say legumes, that's just one word, but that's like several dozens of things like chickpeas, peas, peanuts are legumes, soy. Soy comes with a lot of variety, so you can have. So, for instance, I used to drink a lot of milk and consume a lot of dairy before I went vegan. And then when I went vegan, I just replaced all of that with soy products because, if you have something like curd cheese, you can replace that with tofu. If you have something like milk that you drink, dairy milk, you can replace that with soy milk. So, and the great thing about soy milk is that it has pretty much the exact same nutritional profile that dairy milk has. So the amount of protein that you get is pretty much the same. It depends a little bit on the brand. Some brands have a little bit less, but most of the brands basically give you the exact same amount of protein that you get from dairy milk. So for me, it was a very practical way to switch from a vegetarian diet to a vegan diet because the main part of the animal protein that I was getting was coming from milk and dairy. So I just replaced that one-to-one with soy alternatives. And it's also not that expensive. So it is, for the first step, it is a really great way to do it. And then you have obviously tofu and all kinds of different other soy products. But then there's a huge variety of legumes that you can use as a protein source. And then even when it comes down to, so one of the great things that I learned when I went vegan was that a lot of the stuff that I was already eating was super protein rich, and I didn't even realize. Like, for instance, I was snacking on peanuts, right? So when you look at peanuts, they have 25 grams of protein per 100 grams. So that's like a quarter of what you eat is protein. A steak has 20%, right? But when you think of protein, a steak would be one of the first thing that comes to mind. Nobody thinks of peanuts, right? Although they're actually higher in protein than a steak. Now, obviously, you can make the argument that a steak might be leaner and have less fat and so on. But that's not the point. The point is that the first thing you think about is this body part of an animal, instead of thinking about all the other things that actually are high in protein, but you didn't think of that. And I think that's a huge cultural problem. It's because we basically get raised up in a culture that indoctrinates us with, thinking when we think of protein to think about animals. And that's just not the reality. So it's really not that hard to do it on a vegan diet. And it's really not that hard on any diet, to be honest. So I would put much more, if it's about health, I would really put much more emphasis on, getting a balanced diet and getting a lot of different food sources. And then the next step is really to optimize your diet for your specific needs, because there is no perfect diet for anyone. Like, some people have a low metabolism. I'm one of those. And like, I don't even have to eat a lot, especially nowadays where I have a mostly sedentary lifestyle. I don't burn a lot of calories. So even with very little food, I still have a hard time to lose weight. So for me, I need a completely different diet to get to my goals, basically, if I want to lose weight, for instance, than someone who has a super high metabolism and just needs way more food. That would be me when I was still, competing and I was still training every day. So it really depends on where you are, and then to find the optimal diet for yourself. Yeah, so it was funny when I went vegan. So the thing is, you have to consider that when I started with strongman, when I was started with strongman competitions, that was back in 2006. I was already vegetarian, so I went vegetarian in 2005 at some point. I can not really make up the exact month, but it was, I think, summer of 2005 or so. So in 2006, I started with strongman competitions. I was so the other competitors always knew me as the vegetarian guy. They knew that I wasn't eating meat. There was a phase of a few months where I switched back to my old diet, but otherwise they knew I'm that guy who doesn't eat meat at all. So that was already established. But then when I made the decision to actually go vegan, and it was it was at a time where, because I had just won the title of Germany's Strongest Man, I had a lot of attention and there was a lot of buzz and noise around me, basically. A lot of that having to do with the fact that I was vegetarian and I won the title. So there was actually a mix of, like, some athletes were basically worried because they basically, I think what they thought and felt was pretty much the same thing that my mom thought and felt when I told her. They were like, they just couldn't get it. They were like, what is he doing? Like, vegetarian was okay, but now what is this new extreme thing that he's up to? And then there was some real backlash too. And I think it is mainly that, so the guys who were close to me, they, anybody who knows me privately knows that I'm like really, really real in terms of, like, I don't pretend anything. I don't pretend to be something that I'm not. And I'm really kind of direct, when I talk to someone, and really transparent too. Like, I'm not afraid to expose some really, like, kind of embarrassing parts of myself too. So they know that if I say that I'm doing something, I am doing that thing. But the guys who didn't know me that well, for them, it was, I think all of them couldn't understand what I was doing, and they couldn't really imagine that it would work for a strongman. And obviously that's something I can totally understand, because I didn't think it would work a few months before I did it. So, I was worried that it wouldn't work. So I could understand that quite well. But the guys who didn't know me well enough to know that I don't make up stuff, they just thought I'm lying. They just thought that, oh, he's using that as a publicity stunt or something, because he just wants to be special, and then that way. And because at that point, because I had won the title, and I was actually, in fact, getting a lot of extra attention, because I was not just one more, strong guy, but I was the strong guy who also doesn't eat any meat. I think there was also an element of envy maybe in some of the athletes, because, like, some of the backlash came from athletes who are like objectively better athletes than I was. Like, I was competing internationally too, and some of the international athletes, like I was not the best international athlete or anything. I was among them, but I was like a mid-level guy in the international circuit, right? So some of the guys who were actually like objectively better athletes, they were kind of pissed, because they thought, like, why is this guy getting all this attention just because of his diet? So that mixed with I guess with the feeling that, oh, he's probably just lying, because, like that wouldn't work. And then obviously I continued competing for half a decade, and I was doing really well. I broke several world records, and I was basically getting stronger every year while I was on a vegan diet. And that was really something that a lot of my peer athletes on an international level, they didn't really believe that. So in the beginning, there was a lot of backlash. Some of them, I think, kind of, you know, relaxed a little bit with time. In the beginning, it was some of the reactions were quite extreme. But then there were also some funny reactions. Like, for instance, it's 2012. I'm like 1 year into being vegan, and I was at the World Championships in China. It was a 10-day event. So all the athletes eat basically at the same time, right? So you know, we all see what the other guys eat, and they all eat a lot of meat, and I don't. So I'm sitting there eating my rice and, you know, whatever random kind of vegetables and stuff I can get. And I realized that from day one, there is this one athlete from the Baltics. I think he's a Latvian athlete, and he's just watching me every time we eat. He sits somewhere near, and he's watching me all the time. And then that happens for several days. And then on day 4, he approaches me and he asks if he can sit with me at the table. And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. And he tells me, I've been watching you for some time. And I'm like, yeah, I noticed. So then he tells me, I've seen that you eat mainly rice and vegetables and you don't eat any meat, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm vegan. And he says, yeah, I heard about that. So can I ask you something and you give me a straight answer, honest? And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. And he's like, when you go up to your room, is that where you order your steak? So obviously that was really funny, and you know, we had some fun with it, but I think it encapsulates perfectly basically what went on in the minds of the other athletes. For them, it was just outlandish to think that somebody who is basically at the same level, because, you know, as a strongman, you're used to walk around, you know, in public and always know that if you're in a room with normal people, you are the strongest guy in that room. And so you're like almost a different species of human, right? So you feel like you're on a completely different level. But now comes, and it's part of your identity that your extreme diet that you have, eating a lot of calories and eating a lot of protein, and specifically animal protein, that's a core part of their identity. I know that because it was a core part of my identity before I went vegan. So having that, and then having this guy who comes, it's almost like somebody tells you, oh, I'm only eating salad and I'm as strong as you guys. And then if somebody would tell me that, I would say, oh, that's a lot of bullshit, because that actually doesn't work. And that might really be the core part of the misunderstanding, because what it really is that when you tell them you're vegan, they think of salad. They think of green stuff. They think of like broccoli and stuff. So you cannot build that much body weight and so on just with greens. Greens are great. They have like, you know, they give your body everything it needs to be healthy, but they don't give you a lot of calories, which is a good thing because they're not supposed to give you a lot of calories. But to be a strongman, you need those calories. You need that energy density. And so what they didn't get is that I wasn't eating like salad the whole day. I was eating stuff like legumes, like peanuts. You know, peanuts give you more energy and more protein than a steak. So super easy if you eat the right foods, right? To give your body everything it needs. Yeah, and that was just it. So I had never any bad, like, hard feelings about those reactions. A few guys actually started making up lies. I exposed them publicly for that, because, you know, you just don't do that. But then other than that, I have a total understanding for everyone who is basically in the same position that I was at before I went vegan, and I learned, you know, how easy it actually is. And learning that was the part that turned me into an activist, because I was so afraid to do it because there was nobody who had done it before, you know, at least in strength sports. So, you know, then finding out how easy it is just gave me this feeling of, you got to be that guy who makes it easier for everyone else, because if somebody had done it, if there had been a strong man basically doing it before me, I would have made the decision 6 years earlier. Instead of going vegetarian, I would have just gone vegan, because I would have known, okay, it's possible. So that just put me in a place where I thought, like, I'm going to be that guy who, takes away the fear for a lot of other people. So, and if that doesn't happen and they don't believe me, that's also fine. At some point, they're going to understand. Yeah, so there is this weird concept that I never understood, to be honest, of binding basically masculinity to eating meat, and I understand it to a certain degree, because if you think back, like if you go back to anthropology basically, and you go several generations back, and you find yourself in a tribal society where hunting is a part of everyday life. I have to also say, like, it might just be a completely wrong idea that we have of hunting, because the image that we have is that these societies would be structured in a way where the guys go and hunt, and then the women go and gather some herbs, and then that's like how you get food. I think what we learn now is that probably wasn't even the case, because if you think about what hunting really is, if you have to do it with your bare hands and just a few tools that you have, it's also a lot about sneaking up to animals and catching them and stuff like that. That would be stuff where a female body would probably be even more effective than a male body, because if you have to sneak or something like that, having a smaller frame and having less body weight is probably better. Like, I'm almost convinced that if you have like 10 women and then you have 10 men, and they try to catch, let's say, a chicken, that the women would probably do better, because they would be probably faster and like more agile, and that would be more important for that. So I think this whole idea of like meat eating being connected to being a man just has to do with this weird romanticized idea that we have of what it used to be to be like a caveman, or what it used to be like our ancestors basically. And then the idea that they were eating a lot of meat, and that kind of had something to do with evolution, is also something that ties into that. And most of it is disproven bullshit. Like if you look at anthropology, our ancestors basically just ate whatever they could find, whatever was the easiest calorie source. So eating meat was just one form of adapting basically to different, like when it gets winter and you cannot find that many herbs, and you haven't really discovered the techniques to make fruits and herbs and so on, like hold for long enough so that you can also have them over the winter. It's you're gonna eat whatever is there. So that's the first thing. The other thing is there's also like this idea that if we eat the way that our ancestors ate, that somehow would be healthy, because they apparently didn't have any cancer and stuff like that. But then that's bullshit, because if you think about it, the life expectancy of someone even a few hundred years ago, or if you go 1,000 years, several thousand years ago, you get to a life expectancy of something like 30. Well, you're not going to have a lot of problems with cancer if you die when you're 22, right? Because cancer needs some time to develop. So we still have that now. If you die very early, you're probably not going to have anything, any problems with cancer. So there's this whole like really like romanticized BS idea of what life for our ancestors was, and then how that is, in a twisted way, and connected to how we should eat. Because the idea is that if we eat the same way that they have. And then that's actually the next fallacy that is in that, because the idea is that, oh, we have eaten meat for several hundred thousand years, so that our bodies are adapted to that. But that's not the case, because there is really no hard proof that we have eaten meat for. So it's not only that it depends on where our ancestors would live, because if they live somewhere where there's a lot of fruits and there's a lot of plant-based sources, they would eat that. They would eat whatever, like we are an opportunistic species. So we can see that today. Like even if we look at different cultures in the world, it's not like, every human being in the world nowadays eats the same way. They eat the way that makes sense for the region where they're from. So why would that, it is complete nonsense to think that all humans, in prehistoric times would have eaten the same way. So first of all, they were not eating the same way. So meat eating wasn't something that was prevalent everywhere. And then the other thing is, not even through time would they eat the same way, because climate changes. There's just changes in your environment that are gonna force you to adapt to whatever is then the most practical source for calories. So yeah, I think mostly this whole idea of combining or connecting meat eating to manliness, and then also connecting meat eating in somehow to a healthy eating habit, and then making the connection to how our ancestors ate, that just mainly arises from a complete misunderstanding of evolution and an ignorance towards the actual science of anthropology, and because if you speak to an anthropologist, I guarantee you those romantic ideas are going to be questioned very quickly. I think to think what's sexy is always depends a little bit on the viewpoint of who you ask. I don't want to be like I don't want to be too like it's hard for me to say that, because I can only answer that for myself, and obviously I have a male point of view, and then obviously that's going to be very different towards whoever you're asking. But what I really think is that it's something that makes someone really sympathetic to me, because I don't want to sound sexist, but I feel like it's something else if you ask a woman or if you ask a man, because if you're a woman and you're looking at a man and considering if you find them sexy or not, I feel like it would be really weird for a woman to look at a guy who is like really, really merciless and kind of almost soulless with no empathy, and then think, oh, that's a sexy guy. That would be really twisted. That's my feeling. Because that would also be dangerous, like, right? When you have someone who is probably physically kind of stronger than you are and is kind of really unempathetic, I would be scared as a woman, to be honest. So I'm in a different position as a guy, because usually when I'm in a partnership, I am the stronger part, right? So I don't have to be afraid of anything, even if my partner wouldn't be that empathetic. But yeah, I think the question should be actually the other way around, because for me, being empathetic and being kind is the baseline. That's just what I expect. Like, I cannot say that that's sexy, because everything else seems dysfunctional to me. So it's almost like asking, is it sexy if you don't go on the street and just randomly beat up people? Yeah, I don't know if that's sexy, but what I can say is that it's really unsexy if you do that. So yeah, I would really say, for me, it's just the baseline. That's what I expect from anyone who I interact with, to be kind and to be compassionate. Like my entry point to veganism has been always on a more direct level. My main driving force is just trying to be kind to animals and trying to reduce animal suffering. So the animal rights aspect has been always central to me. And then obviously there's a lot of good reasons to be vegan. One of them being that it's environmentally not only towards climate change, but also towards how much resources the animal industry uses, and then mainly about resource justice and generational justice. For instance, what we do is going to have to be compensated at some point by future generations. So there's a lot of good reasons, climate being one of them, to be vegan. And so I think it's really important to try to use all these different entry points in trying to convince people to go vegan. Like for me, as someone who mainly wants to reduce animal suffering, it's of course, if I can get something else that might be way more important to someone else to convince them to try out veganism, that's just as good as convincing them with animal rights arguments. So I don't really care what the main reason for each individual is, why they try it out. I just want as many people as possible to try it out, because most of the people who try veganism for at least 4 weeks or something like that, they actually at least stick to it partially, and a lot of them actually stick to it completely, because they just it's something that you feel quite quickly that it really feels much better than to just overload your body with the standard Western diet, which just gives you too much energy, gives you too much protein, gives you just too much stress and pathogens that come with all that food. So yeah, I think for me this is just another avenue of trying to just inspire people to be more open and try out veganism. And then to bring it to the point, I think it's also really important to think that one of the things that I'm really struggling with is that a lot of the organizations who are actually where the headline is working on environmental issues and working on climate change, you see the conferences that they do, and then you see them eat meat and stuff like that. And it is established, scientific fact that animal agriculture plays a huge role when it comes to climate change, when it comes to carbon emissions, and then there's the whole methane thing with cows and so on that also plays a role. So there's so many good reasons to if you're someone who is serious about wanting to be helpful and wanting to be part of the solution when it comes to climate change and environmental issues, that you shouldn't touch meat, you shouldn't touch any animal products. So I feel like this is really something that pushes me towards trying to reach out to these people, because I feel like they're partially at least missing the point, because they're trying. And it's also funny because I can also bring that back to my own situation before I went vegetarian, because what was I doing? I was rescuing all these animals, and at the same time I was eating other animals. Complete bullshit. So it's the same kind of bullshit basically if you're gonna care about climate change and you drive your bicycle the whole time, but then you eat meat, and that causes a whole lot of problems. But the main problem is that eating meat, you don't see the whole industry that is behind it. You don't see it in front of you. If you drive a car, and if it's not an electric car, you can literally smell the problem because it comes out of your exhaust. So it is literally an experience that you have right in that time. But if you eat a piece of meat, you don't see all the horror that is behind producing that piece of meat. And I think that's one of the main problems that there is. So yeah, I'm really excited about trying to reach out to everyone who is serious about climate change and about fixing the environment, and really trying to hopefully inspire them to to do the things that are actually way easier than when you compare to if you're trying to completely avoid driving a car, that is much harder than just to go vegan. Like going vegan is so much easier, and it's such a bigger impact than pretty much anything else that you can do, that I feel like, I hope we can inspire some people to actually do the stuff that really has impact. So I enjoy smoothies generally in all forms, but green smoothies. So the main reason that I incorporated smoothies, especially when I was still competing, nowadays is a little bit less. But when I was competing, I was incorporating that into my diet because it solved a whole lot of problems for me at the same time. Well, first of all, I'm not really disciplined when it comes to eating enough greens. So a green smoothie is a perfect way for me to just put those greens in a form where there's not a lot of preparation. You get very quickly, within a few minutes, you basically get a whole meal that contains pretty much everything your body needs to be healthy. Back in the day when I was competing, I would just add some protein powder to it, which is the only thing that is not really in there, right? So the only thing that is missing is protein, but you can just put some protein powder in it, and then you really have a meal that covers everything that your body needs. If you're not an athlete, you can leave the protein out. But if you're an athlete and you want to make sure that you get enough protein and you want to put it in every meal, just put it in there. I used to use just unflavored protein, so then it doesn't matter where you put it in, and it works great in smoothies. So specifically about green smoothies, it's really been for me a great way to just make sure that that my lack of discipline in eating enough greens, that is compensated by having a really quick way to get them in. And then what's also great about it is, the reason for my lack of discipline is because greens are just not really that tasty, let's be honest. In a smoothie though, what you can do is you can always put a few frozen berries into it. And then all of a sudden you get something that is really tasty, and it still gives you all the greens. So I feel like it has been a real game changer for me to discover smoothies, and that's something that happened only after going vegan. It's been a great way for me to make sure that that my diet is not as crappy as it would be if I wouldn't have smoothies in it. So I used to be a vegetarian for several years myself. So until I understood that I wasn't really reaching the goal that I had, which was, reducing animal suffering, and so I went vegan. So to any vegetarian who is now in that position and basically like in the same position that I was, and thinks, I'm actually doing like most of the job in trying to not cause animal suffering, I would say that the difference between a vegetarian and I'm now saying that as an ex-vegetarian who is now vegan for 1.5 decades, I can tell you that, and this is not to make anyone feel bad, I'm saying that about my ex-self that I used to be as well. Being vegetarian is much closer to eating meat than it is to veganism. Like veganism is light years away in terms of what you can achieve in terms of reducing animal suffering, than being vegetarian. Because just as an example, if we take the dairy industry, so in the first moment you might think, oh yeah, I'm just drinking milk, so this is just from those cows who are somewhere on just standing on grass somewhere, living their lives, and then once a day they just give milk, and that's not that bad. I don't think I have to feel bad about that. But the reality is something completely different. So one of the things that I didn't think about as a vegetarian was, why are those cows even giving milk? Well, they're giving milk for the same reason that a human body gives milk. They have to be impregnated. That doesn't happen naturally usually because that's too inefficient. So they get basically artificially impregnated, which is like almost adjacent to rape. It's a horrible thing where somebody puts his hand into the animal's body and just delivers sperm to the vagina of the animal. So it's obviously not that easy for me to talk about it even. So that bizarre part of it should already give you thought as a vegetarian. But it doesn't stop with that, because as we know from human bodies, you don't give milk for forever. So at some point that process has to be repeated. So if you want the cow to continue giving milk. Then the other thing is that 99% of those animals are not somewhere outside on grass. They're somewhere basically imprisoned in a dark place, and then they get some machines connected to them, and that's how, you know, their life is basically every science fiction horror film that you can imagine from the 80s and 90s, where you see, you know, basically human beings being put into machines and being sucked out of their energy. That's basically what we do with those animals. So, like, I would have less of a problem, like ethically, I would have less of a problem with killing an animal than putting an animal in that situation. So drinking milk, really not any better than eating meat. But then a vegetarian might think, well, at least the animals don't get killed. But I already spoke about the fact that they have to impregnate it. So if they're pregnant, there's going to be a baby. That baby gets ripped away from them right away and put, like, traumatized right away after birth and put in a box. And then it eventually gets killed. Like, it eventually gets killed and eaten. So it's not even, you cannot even as a vegetarian say, oh, I'm not, at least I'm not causing animals to be killed, because yeah, those babies have to be killed. And that's, you know, I don't know if that's better than killing the mother. Obviously it's not. So yeah, vegetarianism is not really doing anything, to be honest. So I was a vegetarian for 6 years. And I also have to say that as long as you consume animal, anything from an animal, you also don't get that kind of emotional distance from animal consumption in general. Like I mentioned before that I had a time during those 6 years of vegetarianism where I switched back to eating meat because I was doing horribly in terms of my health. Like, one of the problems was that I was over-consuming on dairy products, and that actually got me chronically iron deficient. And I was even getting supplements from the doctor, and I was still iron deficient. And I only after going vegan did I understand that the dairy consumption was actually causing my iron deficiency, because dairy, like some other things, like coffee is also one of, and black tea, can actually block iron intake. So if you drink a coffee and you take even a high dosage iron supplement, it's probably not going to be absorbed quite well. But what I can tell you is, as a very heavy coffee drinker, I don't have a iron deficiency anymore. So the coffee seems to be not as bad as the dairy was. So the dairy was basically blocking my iron intake. I was doing horribly, and I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So at some point I switched back to eating meat, and then I switched back to vegetarianism after a few months. So the reason I'm telling you that is, the reason that I was even able to switch back to eating meat was because I wasn't far away from eating meat. I was still consuming animal products. So it didn't feel like, obviously I was feeling bad because I was doing it for ethical reasons. So I felt like a failure in that time. Yeah, that was true. But it didn't hurt me, like it didn't hit me on a deep level. And now I'm going to tell you something. After a few months of being vegan, it was the first time that I went through a supermarket, and I went close to the, you know, where they have all the meat and everything. And just smelling that, like, instantly caused like a visceral reaction in my body, and my hair almost like stood out. And I felt like, oh, this is way different from being vegetarian. So as a vegetarian, you're really not that different from a meat eater. You're basically the same thing. You're just eating different products, but you're like right there. You're not really doing anything. So if your motivation is really ethics, you have to be vegan. There is like, because being vegetarian is like saying, yeah, I have a veggie day once a week. That doesn't, like, that's great as a first step, but it's not really doing anything. If you really want to have an impact, you have to go for the full thing, which means just cut out animal products completely from your diet. And then another thing that I have to mention is that I also feel like I'm not a religious person at all. So when I say I'm going to use the word spiritual, but it doesn't really mean anything in my case. It means just that I feel something on a deeper level, like a deeper emotional level. So it felt completely differently going vegan than it felt from going meat to eating meat to being vegetarian on, a spiritual level. Like when I did the switch to vegetarianism, I didn't really I didn't feel anything like it felt more logical, but it was just a cognitive, logical reason that I was doing it, and that was it. That was all the impact that there was. But then after going vegan, I just had a completely different experience eating my meals, because it felt like, and it's probably because deep inside we have a voice who actually knows when we're full of shit, right? So as a vegetarian, that voice was telling me, yeah, it's great, you're doing something, but it wasn't telling me that I'm doing anything great. But when I was vegan and I was sitting there and I was eating my meals, I just felt so in line with my values. I felt like, wow, and it's probably also because there was more effort connected to it as well. Because it was, to be honest, for me quite easy to not eat any meat anymore, because I've never been a huge meat eater anyways. I was eating it just because I thought it's a good protein source. That was my main reason. And because society had told me that it's important to eat it. That was it. So giving it up was no problem at all. But I was always like, dairy used to be always my thing. Like even in school, I had the nickname, they would call me and I think in English that might sound a little bit weird. No, the milk boy. Yeah, they would call me. That was basically my nickname, because you would see me in any school break, in the schoolyard. I would be with a carton of milk, and I would drink that whole carton of milk. And so that was like, everybody was calling me the milk guy, basically. So I really liked drinking milk. So for me, cutting that out of my life, that was way more of a challenge. So that might have been a little bit of the reason that it was just connected with more effort. But I think it was also that I felt like, okay, now for the first time, I have really made sure that all the toxic, bad stuff that is creating problems and that is, damaging the world, that I have cut that out of my lifestyle. And I think lifestyle, that's probably also a super important part, because as a vegetarian, it was just about eating. So I wasn't looking at cosmetics, or not that I use a lot of cosmetics, but I'm not using any lipstick or anything, which, well, maybe I should. But even if it's about shower gel or whatever, all the different products that you use, or clothing and so on, that wasn't part of my considerations back when I was a vegetarian. I was still wearing leather and all that stuff, which is obviously also that's a dead animal skin that you're wearing there. And that's why I say, as a vegetarian, you're really you're not doing anything. But when I went vegan, it went through and through my whole life, right? I was looking at every package of food that I was buying. I was looking at the clothing. I was looking, when it comes to cosmetics and stuff, I was looking at animal testing. So there was it was so much bigger. It was if vegetarianism is 0.1%, then veganism is the 100%, basically. So yeah, that it is a completely different thing. So yeah, and it doesn't only stop with the dairy industry, right? If you look at how eggs are produced, for instance, so the idea would again be, oh, that's just an unfertilized egg. So well, what's that bad? And actually, a lot of people ask me they're like, okay, yeah, I understand why you're vegan, But what about having chickens myself and then just using those eggs, and I can make sure that the chickens are fine, so I could just use the eggs and that should be okay. And then I always have to remind people what eggs actually are. So, because it's funny, like I have never thought about that. And I've been actually someone who I've been studying and learning about animal biology throughout my whole life because I was always interested in animals, and obviously that, extended to animal behavior and animal biology and so on. So it's not that I was the most ignorant guy out there when it comes to animal biology, but still, I had never thought about what eggs actually are. And when you think about it, you realize the problem with it. Because what eggs really are is it's the bird's period, basically, right? It's an unfertilized egg that comes out, and if it's fertilized, there's going to be a baby in it. If it's unfertilized, it's like what happens in a human or in a mammal when we get a period. So, like humans, birds have that pretty much once a month. So that's not very different. Like wild birds, they like wild hens, like the wild version basically of a hen that is in the industry, would do that pretty much 12 times a year. So when you consider that we have bred them in the way that makes them basically have their period every day, like 300 times, almost every day, 300 times a year. And as a human being, at least if you're a female, you know how it feels like to have that. So now consider having that not once a month, but having that pretty much every day. That's hell. That's horrible. So even the existence of the bird that we have genetically manipulated to be, basically in a horrible state where they have to produce this thing that drains their body of energy and so on, just to get that egg. That should make everyone understand that having one of those birds, like obviously you can free them from, like if you're an activist, you might free one of those from the industry, and then you might have them, at home and give them a good home. That's something you can do. And then there are actually some activists who do that, and they're like, yeah, but then what's the problem with me now taking those eggs? I'm not, it's not my fault that the bird exists in the way that it does. I don't want to kill it, and the eggs exist. And then I say, consider the amount of energy that goes out to produce that egg. The only individual who is supposed to get that energy back is the bird. And in fact, you can actually give the egg basically into the, whatever you feed the bird, you can put the egg back into that and give that energy back into the organism. And that's the only ethical way to deal with it. So unfortunately, there's actually some, I'm not going to name any names, but there's some quite known activists who have apparently a disconnect and don't understand what the problem is with what we're doing there. And I'm by using the problem with what we have done genetically to the bird, I'm basically going to the deepest level. I'm not even mentioning what we do, not we, but what the industry does with all the male chicks, for instance, right? When you try to breed the egg-laying hens, your breed that you have is specifically optimized, obviously, for that industry. It's optimized to lay as many eggs as possible. It is not optimized for meat production, which means that obviously you get 50% male and 50% female chicks when you breed them, and the male chicks, one would think, oh, probably they get fed and then they're used for meat production. That is not the case. They just get killed right away because they're not efficient enough for meat production. So let's look into the meat production and what we have genetically done to the chicks who are supposed to become meat producing animals. And that is also something that I think is super important for people to know. I had no idea when I was vegetarian. I only learned that after going vegan. And I think it is so important to just understand what we're actually doing to the animals. Because a chicken, even those genetically manipulated chickens, if you take them and you actually rescue them and you have them at the sanctuary, they can live up to 20 years. They can actually get much older than dogs or even cats. So they can be, 20 or even older than 20 years. That's their natural lifespan. And that's even after genetically being, horribly modified to be exploited in the industry. They can become 20 years old. So now consider, and this is, I think, something that probably barely anyone really knows. Consider the age of in the meat industry of a chicken or of a hen or a rooster that gets killed for meat. You would think that they live some kind of life and then they get killed. Well, I would ask people to kind of guess how long it takes from hatching, from a hatched egg to the point where they get killed. It's 6 weeks. For an animal that normally can live up to 20 years or even longer. So that's a baby, basically. That's like if you have a human baby and you kill it after, let's say, 6 months. That would be probably the equivalent of that. Probably even less than 6 months. So and then the crazy part is, so if that's actually still a baby, how the hell are they getting them so big? So now if you look at that, you understand that they're being force-fed and they're being basically bombarded with nutrients to get them to the stage where we can kill them as quickly as possible. So we can do that in 6 weeks. And that causes horrible issues for the bird as well. Like some of them break their legs because the bones cannot grow as quickly as the muscle can. So you're basically making them heavy enough for the bones to break. So it is absolutely horrible what we do to them. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything natural and this is another huge thing that really annoys me, is that when people speak about meat consumption and how that is supposed to be natural to how we're supposed to live. And I'm like, have you looked what the industry is doing? None of that is in any way natural. It's just a freaking horror show. So how the hell what is gonna make you think that if you consume that stuff, that has anything to do with how we're supposed to live naturally? So that's just that little part. So it doesn't matter if you look at dairy production, if you look at how eggs are produced, or the meat industry itself. It is all just a big horror show. So yeah, if you want to do it right, just cut all of that out of your life. And what you're gonna find out is, not only are you now having a hugely, really, really positive impact on the world, but you're gonna feel so much more happier than before, because you're actually aware of all the horrible stuff that you're now avoiding that you did before. Yeah, so I feel like probably the really hardest thing for me as a vegan and as an activist has always been to just be patient with society, because when you want to get change in society, it just takes a horrible amount of time, because so obviously you have so many people, and then they're caught in their own situations, and then you have like societal factors that also, culture and all kinds of different factors that influence and basically lead to the behavior that we see in individuals. And those things are really, it's hard to change them quickly. And as human beings, we only have a short amount of time that we are here on the planet. So it's very, very easy as an activist, if you see the problem and you really feel it in your heart, it's really hard to be patient and kind of understand that things sometimes take a lot of time. So you see that when in new activists, when people start off, because usually that's right after a pivotal moment where they have some kind of revelation, and then they're super highly motivated, sometimes over motivated, and what you see is that the activism that they do is super dramatic and super aggressive in the beginning. And that's because of that, high energy that they have. And I think something that we should understand is that when we're in that situation, and for some activists that takes like decades where they are in that super high energy state, you can burn out very quickly if you do that. So to other activists, I would always want to remember everyone that we can only be effective in society and in inspiring change in society if we also take care of ourselves. So that's really something that we have to make sure. Like, I mean, in my case, it was, of course, even more extreme because I was literally using my success as an athlete as a tool for activism, as a tool to inspire people to, not think that they have to eat animal protein just to be strong or just to, be just to perform on a high level. So for me, that was, of course, an extreme case of that. But even if you're just an activist who works with completely different other things, you have to take care of yourself, because let's say you're someone who's on the street and does just direct outreach, right? If you don't look healthy and you're trying to convince people to go vegan, but you look super unhealthy, it's not going to be that convincing. Like, if you even have the best arguments, people are going to look for something to tell themselves that your message is not right. Because as a human being, you don't want to change. You just, especially the older we get, the longer we have spent with the lifestyle that we have, right? So when you're 30 or when you're 40 or even older than that, you have spent decades being the way that you are. And if somebody comes and challenges that, first of all, it feels like an attack. And then the second reaction is that you look for a reason to not believe them, because you don't want to change. You want to stay the way you are because you think if you wouldn't think that the way you are is right, you wouldn't be that way. You would already be different. So if you're eating meat, you're probably convinced that it's the right thing to do. So if this vegan comes to you and then tells you, that it's wrong, first of all, challenges your self-image, because what we eat is also super tightly knit to our self-image, right? Because we do that every day, several times a day. So it's a part of our identity. So there comes this vegan and challenges your whole identity. So you're already in a defensive position. And then also tells you that you now have to completely do something that is different from what you do now. They're gonna look, so I'm just saying all that so you understand that it's not a bad thing. It's a natural thing that they're gonna look for reasons to not believe you. And if you look unhealthy, that's gonna be a really low-hanging fruit. They're gonna think, oh, look at this guy, like super, pale skin. And looks like if a strong wind comes, might actually blow them away. So they're gonna find a reason to not believe you, and then they're gonna go home and they're gonna just continue staying the way they are. The other extreme is if you are someone that just like resonates or just radiates, was the word that I wanted to use, just radiates energy, and you're charismatic because you not only look and are healthy, but you just radiate that healthy energy. Then already that low-hanging fruit is not there anymore. That's the first thing. But also it opens up doors that would be probably, because you come across more sympathetically, you come across more inspiring, and so that really helps all of your activism that you want to do. So take some of that lack of patience that you have, that is going to put you in a position where you're going to burn out if you're not careful, and use that to take care of yourself. Exercise, eat well, try to just take care of yourself, because your body is also a tool for your activism. So try to take care of that and try to make sure that you stay healthy so that you can inspire other people to also be healthy. And then going vegan is then obviously going to be part of your message, and it's going to be part of what you inspire people for.